Gosh, I don't know where I am, where I left off.
In the 10th chapter.
I beg your pardon?
Checking Guru Maharaj.
I can't hear you.
Checking, it's in the 10th chapter. 10th chapter, we started. And
Let's go here.
seventh verse is completed. 10th chapter, 7th verse.
Okay, here we are. Okay. So I'll read again from text 7. So you want to follow along, you can go to 11, Canto 11, Chapter 10, 7, and read the translation. And then we're going to commentary by Bhaktisiddhanta. Sorry, Prabhus. Because of the time, I'm just going to begin the class. Eleven, 10, 7. The translation reads, I know. 11, 10, 7. The translation reads, one should see one's real self-interest in life in all circumstances, and should therefore remain detached from wife, children, homeland, relatives, friends, wealth, and so on. Now we're going to go to the illustrations. There goes the curtain opening, okay. These are illustrations from what we already covered the last two classes. There's lots of commentary on this verse. one should see one's real self-interest in life in all circumstances, and should therefore remain detached from wife, children, home, land, relatives, friends, wealth, and so on. This is the BDT report. A devotee of the Lord recognizes that his wife, children, home, land, friends, and money are meant to be engaged in the loving service of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, he does not frantically make arrangements for sense gratification of his family and friends. And another illustration. He is free from the false sense of proprietorship and is always eager to develop his understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is free from false egotism and automatically turns away from useless materialistic conversation. Thus he is steady and not whimsical, and he is always firmly situated in loving friendship at the lotus feet of the spiritual master. There's one more, but I'll let you enjoy the painting before we explain. The context of all of this is chapter 10 follows 7, 8, 9. And 7, 8, 9 are a response to Uddhava's question. How can I become free from my undue attachment to family life because it serves as an obstacle for seeing and for properly seeing and understanding you? Now, Uddhava is not like that, but he is a householder, and he's asking on householders' behalf. He's like Arjuna. He's behaving or assuming the position by Krishna's arrangement of one who's attached. And because undue attachment is an obstacle, how to overcome it. So 7, 8, 9 were an answer, Krishna's answer to that question. How can one become attached to Krishna without becoming detached from the temporary? Well, you strive to become attached to Krishna. In sadhana bhakti, we strive. And we find there's walls, there's obstacles, and that's our attachment to the temporary. Specifically, being the enjoyers of the temporary. We're attached to that idea. So it's hard to overcome that idea. And without overcoming that idea, the negative is, without overcoming that idea, then one can't understand Krishna, know Krishna, be Krishna connected. So it's two things simultaneously. Strive to be connected and make your efforts to let go. So Krishna described in 3 chapters what detachment looks like and impetuses for detachment. And in this chapter 10, the commentaries say Krishna is now going to describe how to. You know, people like the how-to question. So here's the how-to answer. And it's in stages, and in practical terms for a householder, because Uddhava is a householder, how to become detached. So how to properly regard. So in comes the spiritual master, because in the previous chapters, 7, 8, 9, the person speaking was an Avaduta Brahmin who had 24 spiritual masters. And then in this chapter, it's one spiritual master, a principal spiritual master. And then the other spiritual masters were a honeybee and the wind and trees and the sky and so on. Insects, birds, a prostitute, a young girl with bangles. And so he learned about knowledge and detachment from them. Now comes in chapter 10 is the etiquette and the importance of shelter of a spiritual master. And then from that shelter of the spiritual master comes instructions, just lessons that you can intuitively understand with the help of intelligence, with the help of supersoul. There's explicit instructions. So here's some explicit instructions in detachment. So you see all the clutter. There's, a sword and a helmet and all kinds of clutter, books and stuff. Okay, so here's the text that this is meant to illustrate. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has given the following example. An ordinary man is very eager to accumulate more and more money, and he maintains his wealth in the form of bank accounts, properties, gold, and so on. As long as these different assets are contributing to his financial well-being, he sees them equally and considers that they belong to him. But if some of his assets are taken by the government for taxes, or if they are lost in an unfortunate business arrangement, then he is forced to give up his sense of proprietorship. In the same way, everyone should be intelligent enough to observe that one's sense of ownership over innumerable material objects, that's what the painting is, innumerable material objects, is not permanent. Therefore, one should develop detachment from these things. So, temporary signal, detachment. Now, it doesn't mean trash. It means detachment from the sense of happiness is found in these objects and being the enjoyer of the objects, and that's happiness. It's detachment from that to transition to sat. And to say it negatively, if that detachment from the temporary doesn't take place, then it's an obstacle for attachment to sat. And that's the common experience for a neophyte or a sadhaka, and it's a back and forth, up and down, sine curve kind of thing. So that's what this topic is. And now I'm going to go to this other screen. And in this other screen, it's Bhaktisiddhanta takes this verse and really expands on it extensively in the beginning portion of Chaitanya Bhagavat. The beginning portion of Chaitanya Bhagavat, Adi Kanda, chapter 1, text 29, there's a verse that he comments on. The verse is, sages condemn the association of women, yet they glorify Lord Balaram's association with the cowherd girls in the rasa dance. So it sounds like a contradiction. It's a section where he's glorifying Lord Nityananda. Because Lord Nityananda is the spiritual master of the author, Vrindavan Das Thakur. And he likes glorifying his spiritual master. So his spiritual master, Lord Nityananda, is not different than Balaram. Balaram is glorified for association with the cowherd girls in the rasa dance, while at the same time sages, yogis, those who are detached from sense objects, they condemn the association of women. So it's like, what's the difference? So how come this is glorified and that's condemned? So there's a really long purport, so long that it's going to take the second day to go through it. And what he has done is from different angles of vision, Bhaktisiddhanta is explaining this tension or apparent dichotomy where one thing is condemned and it seems like the same thing is glorified. To understand transcendental attachment distinct from mundane attachment. So here we go. This is halfway through. It's a really long purport. If you want to read the whole thing, you can. Chaitanya Bhagavat, Adikanda, Chapter 1, Text 29. Bhaktisiddhanta writes, in the Srimad Bhagavatam 6, 4, 52 to 53, it is described how Prajapati Daksha and his descendants, who were expert in associating with women and who followed the path of pravriti. Path of pravriti means the path of enjoyment by contacting sense objects. So it's a path that some persons follow who have a strong desire to be the enjoyer of sense objects, and they find places within the Vedas that teach one how to enjoy religiously objects of the senses, pravriti, karma kanda specifically. And they were, so Prajapati and his followers, his sons, were expert in enjoying religiously. And who followed the path of pravriti or sense enjoyment, they were instructed by Lord Hari to continually engage in material enjoyment and follow the non-devotional path of associating with women. That's how they took it. The Karma Kanda tells people that want sense enjoyment, go for it. Do it religiously, go for it. And there's submission to the Vedas, which is the principle of elevation. That's how Karma Kanda works to elevate, because it's submission to Narayana, the source of the Vedas. That's purifying, indirectly and very slowly. When the king of the Vidyadharas, Chitraketu, saw the Lord of the Paramahamsas and foremost of the Avadutas, Lord Shiva, embracing Parvati, he spoke the following words in Srimad Bhagavatam 6:17-8. Ordinary, conditioned persons generally embrace their wives and enjoy their company in solitary places. Now, what he was meaning to say is, Lord Shiva was doing this in front of sages. It wasn't a solitary place. You'll see, hear the description or see the painting. There's Narada Muni, there's this sage and that yogi, and people that disdain worldly association. Parvati and Lord Shiva were not like ordinary people. Parvati took it otherwise, so she cursed him. So this is the Bhaktisiddhanta's way of making a distinction between mundane and not mundane association with objects and women and home and wealth and paraphernalia and things. Next paragraph. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 7:6, this is Prahlad Maharaj. 11 through 13 and 17, Prahlad Maharaj instructs his demoniac friends as follows, quote, how can a person who is most affectionate to his family, the core of his heart being always filled with their pictures, give up their association? Specifically, a wife is always very kind and sympathetic and always pleases her husband in a solitary place. Who could give up the association of such a dear and affectionate wife? Simply for the satisfaction of two important senses, the genitals and the tongue, one is bound by material conditions. How can one escape? He's talking to his 5-year-old friends. but he's able to understand these things. Next paragraph. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 9, Prahlad Maharaj says to Lord Nrsingadev, quote, sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. Grihamedis, so-called grahastas, who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually it is a source of distress. The kripanas, the fools who are just the opposite of brahmanas, are not satisfied by repeated sensuous enjoyment. Those who are dhira, however, who are sober and who tolerate this itching, are not subjected to the sufferings of fools and rascals. Next, while describing the four ashrams, later in the 7th canto, Sri Narada Muni spoke to Maharishi Yudhisthira the following verses, 7, 12, 6 through 7, 9 through 11. Fully controlling his senses, he should associate only as much as necessary with women or those controlled by women. A brahmachari, or one who has not accepted the grahastha ashram or family life, must rigidly avoid talking with women or about women, for the senses are so powerful that they may agitate even the mind of a sannyasi, a member of the renounced order of life. Woman, singular, is compared to fire, and man is compared to a butter pot. Therefore, a man should avoid associating even with his own daughter in a secluded place. Similarly, he should also avoid association with other women. One should associate with women only for important business and not otherwise. As long as a living entity is not completely self-realized, as long as he is not independent of the misconception of identifying with the body, which is nothing but a reflection of the original body and senses, he cannot be relieved of the conception of duality, which is epitomized by the duality between man and woman. Thus, there is every chance that he will fall down because his intelligence is bewildered. All the rules and regulations apply equally to the householder and the sannyasi, the member of the renounced order of life. The grahastha, however, is given permission by the spiritual master to indulge in sex during the period favorable for procreation. Bhaktisiddhanta is a Naishtika brahmachari. So what is it his business to discuss these things? But it's in Chaitanya Bhagavat, and it's also, we're hearing it in the Bhagavatam. And so he's very knowledgeable in the scripture, and he's gathered all these resources together to help us get a really clear picture of what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. And regardless of ashram, it's what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. What's proper attachment and what's undue attachment. Continuing. So this section we just read, we're reading another one from the same section. It's a whole discussion on Varnashram. Following the Prahlad Maharaj story, Yudhisthira heard it from Narada Muni. So he asked Narada Muni, wow, Prahlad is way up there. How does one get way up there? I'm a king. I'm supposed to guide and instruct my citizens. How do I instruct my citizens to get up there? And so Narada explains the Varnashram system. So that's the context. In Srimad Bhagavatam 7, 14, 12 through 13, Narada says to Yudhisthira Maharaj, therefore, if one can give up his attachment to such a wife, he conquers the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who was never conquered by anyone. Through proper deliberation, one should give up attraction to his wife's body, because that body will ultimately be transformed into small insect stool or ashes. What is the value of such insignificant body? How much greater is the Supreme Being, who is all-pervading like the sky? Next, chapter 15. Narada continues explaining, one who is driven by his senses, especially by the tongue and genitals, must accept the position of a household dog to satisfy his senses. Canto 9, Chapter 6. Saurabhi Muni repents after his extended association with women as follows, quote, a person desiring liberation from material bondage must give up the association of persons interested in sex life and should not employ his senses externally in seeing, hearing, talking, walking, and so on. One should always stay in a secluded place, completely fixing his mind at the lotus feet of the ultimate, of the unlimited personality of Godhead. And if one wants any association at all, he should associate with persons similarly engaged. Now that's a tyagi. While describing the characteristics of Lord Rama and Sita, Shukadeva Goswami says to Maharaj Parikshit in the Srimad Bhagavatam 9:11-17, quote, the attraction between man and woman or male and female always exists everywhere, making everyone always fearful. Such feelings are present even among the controllers like Brahma and Lord Shiva, and is the cause of fear for them. What to speak of others who are attached to household life in this material world? So if you're householders and you feel you're getting picked on, it's not finger pointing and blaming. It's instructions how to navigate crossing through this territory, the material energy territory. Canto 9, Chapter 14. Shukadeva Goswami describes the topics of Urvashi and Pururava. Quote, my dear king, you are a man, a hero. Don't be impatient and give up your life. Be sober. This is Urvashi speaking to Pururava. Don't be impatient and give up your life. Be sober, and don't allow the senses to overcome you like foxes. Don't let the foxes eat you. In other words, you should not be controlled by your senses. Rather, you should know that the heart of a woman is like that of a fox. There is no use making friendship with women. Women, as a class, are merciless and cunning. They cannot tolerate even a slight offense. For their own pleasure, they can do anything irreligious, and therefore they do not fear killing even a faithful husband or brother. Women are very easily seduced by men. Therefore, polluted women give up the friendship of a man who is their well-wisher and establish false friendship among fools. Indeed, they seek newer and newer friends one after another. Pretty heavy. And then also the 9th canto, 19th chapter, particularly verses 1 through 20 and 24 through 28, wherein Maharaj Yayati, speaking to Devyani, condemns the association of women with the story of a he-goat and she-goat. Next, in Srimad Bhagavatam 11:3, 18 through 19, Sri Prabodha, one of the 9 Yogendras, speaks the following words to Maharaj Nimi, the king of Videha. Quote, accepting the roles of male and female in human society, conditioned souls unite in sexual relationships. Thus, they constantly make material endeavors to eliminate their unhappiness and unlimitedly increase their pleasure. But one should see that they inevitably achieve exactly the opposite result. In other words, their happiness inevitably vanishes, and as they grow older, their material discomfort increases. Wealth is a perpetual source of distress. It is most difficult to acquire, and it is virtual death for the soul. What satisfaction does one actually gain from his wealth? Similarly, how can one gain ultimate and permanent happiness from one's so-called home, children, relatives, and domestic animals, which are all maintained by one's hard-earned money? It keeps going. Bhagavatam 11:5, 13, and 15. Sri Chamasa, that's another one of the Navyogendras, instructs King Nevi as follows, quote, religious sex life is also permitted, but only in marriage for begetting children, and not for sensuous exploitation of the body. Unfortunately, however, the less intelligent materialists cannot understand that their duties in life should be performed purely on the spiritual platform. The conditioned souls become completely bound in affection to their own corpse-like material bodies and their relatives and paraphernalia. In such a proud and foolish condition, the conditioned souls envy other living entities as well as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, who resides in the heart of all beings. Thus, enviously offending others, the conditioned souls gradually fall down to hell. Not a lovely picture, huh? And it keeps going. Lord Krishna's narration to Uddhava on the conversation between Maharaj Yadu and the self-realized mendicant who tells the story of a pigeon and his wife in the Srimad Bhagavatam may also be discussed in this regard. Again, 11:8, 1, 7 through 8, 13 through 14, and 17 through 18. The mendicant Brahmana further instructs Maharaj Yadu as follows, quote, O king, the embodied living entity automatically experiences unhappiness in heaven or hell. Similarly, happiness will also be experienced even without one seeing it. Therefore, a person of intelligent discrimination does not make any endeavor to obtain such material happiness. One who has failed to control his senses immediately feels attraction upon seeing a woman's form, which is created by the illusory energy of the Supreme Lord. Indeed, when the woman speaks with enticing words, smiles coquettishly, and moves her body sensuously, his mind is immediately captured, and thus he falls blindly into the darkness of material existence, just as a moth, maddened by fire, rushes blindly into its flames. A foolish person with no intelligent discrimination is immediately aroused at the sight of a lusty woman, beautifully decorated with golden ornaments, fine clothing, and other cosmetic features. Being eager for sense gratification, such a fool loses all intelligence and is destroyed, just like the moth who rushes into the blazing fire. A saintly person should never touch a young girl. In fact, he should not even let his foot touch a wooden doll in the shape of a woman. But by bodily contact with a woman, he will surely be captured by illusion, just as the elephant is captured by the she-elephant due to his desire to touch her body. A man possessing intelligent discrimination should not, under any circumstances, try to exploit the beautiful form of a woman for his sense gratification, just as an elephant trying to enjoy a she-elephant is killed by other bull elephants also enjoying her company. One trying to enjoy a lady's company can at any moment be killed by her other lovers who are stronger than he. A saintly person dwelling in the forest, in the renounced order of life, should never listen to songs or music promoting material enjoyment. Rather, a saintly person should carefully study the example of the deer, who is bewildered by the sweet music of the hunter's horn and is thus captured and killed. Becoming attracted to the worldly singing, dancing, and musical entertainment of beautiful women, even the great sage Rishi Shringa, the son of Rigi, fell totally under their control, just like a pet animal. This is a different name of Rishishringa's father that I'm used to seeing, but here it's Mrigi. Several more pages. And it's 8:10. Pingala's words of frustration are narrated by Lord Krishna to Uddhava in the Srimad Bhagavatam 11:8, 30-34 as follows. This is the prostitute. Just see how greatly illusioned I am, because I cannot control my mind. Just like a fool, I desire lusty pleasure from an insignificant man. I am such a fool that I've given up the service of that person who, being eternally situated within my heart, is actually most dear to me. That most dear one is the Lord of the universe, who is the bestower of real love and happiness and the source of all prosperity. Although he is in my own heart, I have completely neglected him. Instead, I have ignorantly served insignificant men who can never satisfy my real desires and who have simply brought me unhappiness, fear, anxiety, lamentation, and illusion. Oh, how I have uselessly tortured my own soul. I've sold my body to lusty, greedy men who are themselves objects of pity. Thus, practicing the most abominable profession of a prostitute, I hope to get money and sex pleasure, two things. This material body is like a house in which I, the soul, am living. The bones forming my spine, ribs, arms, and legs are like beams, cross beams, and pillars of the house, and the whole structure, which is full of stool and urine, is covered by skin, hair, and nails. The 9 doors leading into the body are constantly excreting foul substances. Besides me, what woman could be so foolish as to devote herself to this material body, thinking that she may find pleasure and love in this contraption? Certainly, in this city of Videha, I alone am completely foolish. I neglected the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who awards us everything, even our original spiritual form, and instead I desire to enjoy sense gratification with many men. Please see verses 35, 39, and 42 in the same chapter. If you haven't had enough, here's some more. I'll just read one more paragraph because it goes on for 3 more pages. He's just giving us a tour of maybe, well, let's see. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 11:9, that's the chapter previous to this one, the mendicant Brahmana instructs King Yadu as follows. A man who has many wives is constantly harassed by them. He is responsible for their maintenance, and thus all the ladies constantly pull him in different directions, each struggling for her self-interest. Similarly, the material senses harass the conditioned soul, pulling him in many different directions at once. On one side, the tongue is pulling him to arrange tasty food. Then, thirst drags him to get a suitable drink. Simultaneously, the sex organs clamor for satisfaction, and the sense of touch demands soft, sensuous objects. The belly harasses him until it is filled. The ears demand to hear pleasing sounds. The sense of smell hankers for pleasant aromas, and the fickle eyes clamor for pleasing sights. Thus, the sense organs and limbs, all desiring satisfaction, pull the living entity in many directions. And now comes this morning's verse, and I think I'll end with this. Lord Krishna instructs Uddhava, 11:10:7, this morning's verse, 25 and 27 through 29 as follows. Quote, one should see one's real self-interest in life in all circumstances and should therefore remain detached from wife, children, home, land, relatives, friends, wealth, and so on. Accompanied by heavenly women, the enjoyer of the fruits of sacrifice goes on pleasure rides in a wonderful airplane which is decorated with circles of tinkling bells and which flies wherever he desires, being relaxed, comfortable, and happy in the heavenly pleasure gardens. He does not consider that he is exhausting the fruits of his piety and will soon fall down to the mortal world. If a human being is engaged in sinful, irreligious activities, either because of bad association or because of his failure to control his senses, then such a person will certainly develop a personality full of material desires. He thus becomes miserly towards others, greedy and always anxious to exploit the bodies of women. When the mind is so polluted, one becomes violent and aggressive, and, without the authority of Vedic injunctions, slaughters innocent animals for sense gratification. Worshipping ghosts and spirits, the bewildered person falls fully into the grip of unauthorized activities and thus goes to hell, where he receives a material body infected by the darkest modes of nature. And he goes on through the end of the Bhagavatam, and then he goes from the Bhagavatam to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and many references there. So here's the last paragraph. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna and Baladev, are the eternal shelter of all devotees, they are suitable personalities for enjoying with the gopis, who are under the shelter of Madhurya Rasa. The gopis have no material conceptions, like conditioned souls. In other words, living entities in this material world consider themselves enjoyers and enjoy the company of women only due to material conceptions. But when Lord Balaram, who is the source of all Vishnu tattvas, performs Rasa Leela, there's no possibility of any material abominations or illicit behavior. Therefore, when the most fortunate munis, who are conversant with the Supreme Lord Baladev's glories, see his pastimes through divine eyes, they offer prayers with folded hands. So, if you're interested in getting a strong dose of detachment, there's the purport. He assembled it all in one place. I mean, it's not all, but major references on the theme. Because step back a few steps. It's Krishna's teaching Uddhava how to become like an elevated person, a devotee who knows Krishna. And there's a big obstacle, and that's the desire to be an enjoyer of the temporary. And there's categories of the temporary. But that's how to overcome that obstacle. So hearing from the Bhagavatam is helpful. Shinvata Kata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana. Even if one doesn't agree or doesn't understand, just as our sitting here and hearing, there's purification, and there's degrees of purification and degrees of elevation from that purification. But the goal that Uddhava is asking for is to get to the stage where he can just have attachment to Krishna. So we hear it and we believe it. We have faith in it. At the same time, we have some attachment to the temporary. So we continue to hear. And when you hear it again and again and again, I mean, so far it's 4 chapters worth of the same message. Must be an important message. And in the panorama that Bhaktisiddhanta has taken the trouble to put it together, the message is consistent and very strong. Complacency is a disease, or it's a symptom that keeps us stuck. And so if we want to get unstuck, we can't be complacent. We must not act beyond our position. This is the very same topic we discussed this weekend during the Memorial Day weekend retreat. One of the topics was this one. Don't act beyond your position, but at the same time strive to progress. And as you strive to progress, it's, the principle is detachment and attachment. And you strive to progress in a measure that is sustainable for you and doable for you, and you continue and continue. And the primary means is what we're doing, hearing and chanting. The Bhagavad Dharma method is this one. So if something sounds extreme, or something sounds like, yeah, I can relate to that, whatever our position may be, it's important to recognize, be self-honest, this is our theme from the weekend, and accept, this is my position, and then consider progress. And the medicine of Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to help us make that needed progress. So let's see if there's some discussion. We have Premanda has her hand up there.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In the purport, in the Bhagavatam purport by Srila Prabhupada, he makes a comment in the first paragraph and also towards the end of the second paragraph that one should maintain friendship with spiritual master. And then he says in the second one that one should maintain friendship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and also the spiritual master, to be able to remain steady and be detached, all those problems that are listed there. So, friendship, when we think about friendship, it is like generally you feel like with friends you are too familiar. I'm assuming that the word friendship here does not mean that. It is something different.
Yes. First of all, it's not Prabhupada's purport. It's his disciples of Prabhupada's purport that have written this. And the answer to your question is yes. Like Suradam Sarvadehinam from Bhagavad Gita 5:29. He is the dearmost friend of every living entity. So that kind of friendship, not Sakya Rasa, but he is friendly towards us and we should be friendly towards him, as opposed to the opposite, inimical. He's not inimical towards us and we should not be inimical towards him. Even if things are, not going the way that we would want them to go, etc., we remain friendly towards him. We don't feel that he's being unfriendly towards us. That general sense. And it's, same, it's not like my spiritual master is my buddy. It's that other kind of friendly disposition. Obviously both are the objects of service, but it's the friendly disposition as opposed to something else.
So from that, I don't know if I take the real literal meaning of that purport as it is. It sounded like if you have that, then it is easier to overcome all those.
Yes, it's a
obstacles.
seed that helps. Can you take the microphone and pass that around? Someone else? Corner, behind you.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I had recently had because at my work I go to people's home.
Yeah,
I had a person who had a chronic hoarding issues, like she was hoarding a lot of things in the house. Because she grew up in a world war in Poland, and she was in the fear always that
she'll lose
everything. So she would continue, even the food items, she would keep it for months. I had a realization that time when I saw her that do I have a fear too? Because I am also,
There's uncertainty at every step.
Yes. So because of, that realization is that I don't have complete faith in Krishna, and that
Yes.
fear is there.
Yes.
That the insecurity is there, and that's why I want, for me, is like I need that much to at least survive in the life. So that keeps changing. I just wanted to share this.
Yes. It's true for all who are conditioned souls. And there's more realization of it at some times and less realization of it at other times. But it's true. Fear accompanies conditioned souls.
Thank you, Maharaj. And the question I have is, all these instructions seems like is meant for only men. Is it okay to also assume
Yes.
that it is
Yes.
equally applicable?
Yes.
Okay.
In short, yes. I mean, at times Prabhupada would say, this is male-oriented, ladies should understand, just flip it around, and it's the same principle applies to ladies, just flip it around. And in some cases, in the quotes here, the Pingala speaks like that.
Yes.
So it's flipped. But it has to do with the Vedic culture, not just Indian culture, but Vedic culture. But the principle is the same for both.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay. The other side, way over here.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I have a question about chanting.
About
Chanting.
chanting.
In
Glasses. Go ahead.
our reading group, we're reading Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14, Modes of Material Nature. So one question came up that chanting, hearing, these are transcendental activities. But oftentimes we're chanting inattentively. So where does that fall? Is that under mode of?
No, it depends on what one is distracted by. That will identify which mode.
So because we're inattentive, our chanting is always in the
It doesn't mean
mode.
necessarily this mode or that mode. It depends on what the object that one's mind is attracted to is driven by a particular mode. I mean, supposing, take something like extreme, supposing one's contemplation is murder. Supposing one's contemplation is business. Supposing one's contemplation is speculation. So the distraction quality is driven by the mode. So it's not that the mode is, any one of the modes, it's that mode that causes distraction. It's turning attention away from Krishna. That's the operative principle. And then what one is attracted or distracted by, that's the modes. Does that answer your question? No.
So this inattentive chanting is under, we're still chanting under the modes. Or is
You're presuming something that I'm not agreeing with. There's a free will principle. And, a heart that's clean principle and a heart that's not clean. So, in one sense, distraction is under the modes, but which mode depends on, the mode. Will determine what you're distracted by. Flip it around. Is it possible to chant without distraction? And is that under the modes? No. And if one is disconnected or not sufficiently connected to Krishna, is there a possibility one will be distracted? Yes. So in a broad sense, you can say Prakriti, attraction for being the enjoyer of Prakriti. And then there are different types of enjoyment according to the modes. Chapter 11, that's chapter 11. Happiness in the modes, etc. Did that answer it or no?
yes.
Okay.
So until we come to pure chanting, we're not transcending the modes.
You can say the same thing in a different way. My free will is always operating. And when that time comes that by free will I choose, and by Krishna's kindness, he accepts my submission to him. And when my free will comes to the position of there's no other shelter for me, not just say it, but you're there, then that's where pure chanting happens. Then devotional service begins, meaning pure devotional service. Okay?
Thank you.
This question is from Sucharita Mataji. I think it's similar to Sanjay Prabhu's question. How much are these statements of detachment applicable to women?
Same question.
And her second question is related to Premananda Mataji's question about friendly, is the understanding of friendly relations as being favorable?
Yes, exactly.
And this is from Visalaksha Prabhu. What is the key to balance the spiritual life and material life at the same time, since one needs to live here forcefully?
One needs to live here.
Out of force. We are forced to live here.
The answer, Rupa Goswami gives the answer to that question in the teaching of detachment. Anasaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjitaha nirbandha Krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagya uchate. The answer is in that verse. He's familiar with the verse. So there's the answer, how you balance or make this connection between things and detachment to things. Yukta Vairagya principle.
This is from Girivaradhari Prabhu. This is Shriya Mataji, I think. When we read Bhagavad Gita and Krishna book with my teenage daughter, and when she hears strong statements about women, she feels uncomfortable. How to make her understand the bigger picture and underlying principle behind this?
Well, you can't make anybody understand anything. The language of make people do something is, it's a common expression from people that are born in India, and I'm taking exception to the language. You can't make somebody do anything. But, how can I help my daughter not feel uncomfortable? Several things. One, it's already been discussed twice, but we say it a third time. The same applies, as is spoken about women, the same applies to men, or same as is spoken about men, the same applies to women. This inadvertent attachment is a problem for men in association with women, women in association with men. And there's a very interesting answer to what in general, like this one section that we read that I was a little uncomfortable with, where it's just quite disparaging towards women, but the flip side is men who are too much attached are like that too. And that is to say, the flip side is, or the converse is, when one is strong in Krishna consciousness, then whether a man or woman who's shows these symptoms of weaknesses, etc. Because I know, spiritually strong women are not like that, and spiritually weak men are like that. So to help your daughter understand these things, this is for spiritually weak people, men or women. And the antidote, when you hear these things, hear with that lens or that frame of processing, and it's meant as an impetus for spiritual development, because men are like that too, very much like that. Okay.
Kalpataru Mataji's question. How to give the same message of attachment
How to do what?
How to give the message of attachment to Krishna and detachment to temporary to someone who is not practicing, or to be, or to the, basically to how to give the message of attachment to Krishna and detachment to temporary to the onlookers or new people in a way they can absorb.
Every time I hear these kind of things, it's like, it depends on the person, depends on the relationship, it depends on the circumstance. That's one. And the second is, the best is to model it. And you may not even have to say it. Just model it. I mean, for example, that's what Prabhupada did. He just modeled it. He didn't say anything to Sally Agarwal. He didn't say anything to the new people at 26 2nd Avenue. He just modeled it. And those that were inspired by him got the message, and as much as they could emulate or follow his example, they did. Now, Sally Agarwal didn't become a sadhaka, but she held in her heart, and for as long as she lived, held Srila Prabhupada in the highest regard. And that's a great step of spiritual progress. She became attached to Prabhupada in a loving way. without his having to say anything, just modeling it. So it depends on the person and the circumstance. That you're sensitive to what they can handle and process, that's good too. So you think about it with the persons that you're interacting with, and in sensitive way, Krishna will give you the intelligence. What are some options for this person in this circumstance?
Radha Kunja Bihari Prabhu's question. Please forgive me for saying this, but these statements from the scriptures sounds like men are helpless creatures and have to be protected from the advances of women. Is this view fair? Isn't the opposite also true?
Yes, the opposite is also true. You know, the problem is, whether in a male or a female body, the tendency to think oneself Purusha is a problem. So women who think themselves Purusha or men who think themselves Purusha, that's the problem. I mean, it's another way of saying, you know, those who have spiritual advancement don't have this problem, whether it's a man or a woman. Okay? There's something behind you, and then I want to end. It's late.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. We were reading Canto 3, Chapter 14. Chapter 14, Canto 3.
From Bhagavad Gita? Or here?
Srimad Bhagavatam. In our reading group, we were reading Canto 3, Chapter 14.
Canto which?
3.
Canto 3, Chapter 14.
Yeah. Diti and Kashyapa Muni.
A little further away, it's like too strong. I can't, it's muffled. Go ahead. Speak.
Diti and Kashyapa Muni.
Okay.
And there, in contrast, Kashyapa Muni actually talks about how taking, he says one can cross over the ocean with sea-going vessels, one can cross the dangerous situation of the material ocean by living with a wife. And there seems to be a whole series of things that he talks about,
Yeah.
which is kind of redeeming from, you know, some
The
of
proper
these.
perspective. There's proper and there's improper. Both. You know, the blind well and the fortress.
Yes.
You know, the path to hell and the path of elevation. No, so there's proper and there's improper. Okay?
Yes.
You're done? You want to say something? Sangeeta, go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So we're talking about the same chapter, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3,
You're reading
Chapter
group.
14.
Okay.
So one of the purports, it was so very good understanding I got, that even Kashyap Muni was, it said that he was a follower of Lord Shiva, and he could not, he had to give up for the desires of his wife. But at the same time, Haridas Thakur, because he was chanting, I forgot the number, 300,000 names of
Yes.
Hari, and
So,
he did not have to, he could control his the situation he was in. It helped because he was chanting so many names every day. So is that the right understanding, that even at that time only the chanting helped, and even in this age the chanting is, if
Well,
you
the emphasis goes to chanting, but it's not, the emphasis goes to bhakti. It's awakened by chanting. So that there's the instrument, the means, and then there's the goal that you can reach So it's the awakening of bhakti. I mean, supposing someone is doing deity worship in very absorbed way, and they're not chanting 300,000 names, will they be, if you're absorbed in bhakti, that's the protection. And if one isn't absorbed in bhakti, so whatever and special significance for Haridas Thakur, of course, and for this age of Kali is the chanting process. But there's other activities along with chanting that are very powerful and beneficial. We're going to end. Srila Prabhupada Ki.